The man police describe as a person of interest in connection with the shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, seems to share some similar traits to other mass shooters. For analysis of the investigation so far, I want to bring in CBS News security and law enforcement analyst James Gagliano. James, really good to see you. I think the connection that the person of interest has, as soon as we heard the description, I think everyone started to think Uvalde. I definitely thought Buffalo. So this person of interest, early 20s, white. His YouTube videos make references to gun violence. He's accused of using a high-powered rifle in the shooting. So based on your experience with the FBI, what does this tell you?
Well, Anne-Marie, good to join you. I wish it was under different circumstances, but you did highlight some other recent mass shootings that had some type of similar connection here. I would even go back as far as October 1st of 2017 and the Country Music Festival in Las Vegas, where Stephen Paddock rented a room at a hotel and killed, I think, 50 or 50-something people. So this was a similar situation where you had somebody in a perch. They had a high ground position, and they were able to drop plunging fire into a group of 4th of July revelers. And it's horrific. And I think the most common thread through these, and I have studied these now going back as far as August 1st, 1966, and the infamous Texas clock tower shooting, when really police have started to look at these as a phenomenon and a tragedy in America, is these individuals, whatever ideological bent they have, where they fall in the ideological continuum, they are grievance collectors. They harvest grievances, and typically they're disenfranchised and they're disenchanted, and they feel like they have to seek some type of retribution. Too early to determine motive yet, Anne-Marie, but I think we're leading in that direction.
You know, James, you probably saw in Chris's report earlier, the person of interest had an uncle who he lived with who said he didn't see any signs leading up to this shooting. That seems to be a common refrain in these mass shootings. And Anne-Marie and I have talked about this before. It seems hard to believe for us specifically, because we were raised with parents who, in my house, like my mother and father did like a prison search every weekend, where they would lift the bed up, and anything that I had under the bed was contraband, and
you're in their house, nothing belongs to you. Everything belongs to them.
I had to keep the door open at all times. There was no privacy, and so I just find that incredibly difficult to believe. I understand, obviously, that it's a different generation and parents are perhaps behaving in a different fashion, but do you believe that when someone says, "Look, I live with this person, I'm the guardian, and I never saw any signs"?
Yeah, sometimes things can be hiding in plain sight. And look, people that conduct these, they can certainly have mental health issues. They could certainly have a troubled childhood. There's certainly a lot of things that you could point to and say, this might have been a factor in this. Now, I'm not a psychologist or sociologist, but I can say a big piece of this is the ability people have to become radicalized. And again, we don't know if this individual was, but he was clearly inspired to do something. Now, how does that happen? Well, you spoke about this. I mean, I'm a little older than both of you, but there's no way I could have sat in my basement and been on a laptop and been connected to the world. And so for all the good things that the internet brings us, it also brings us access to hate. Now, is this individual somebody that was inspired by hate? Still too early to tell. Could it be workplace violence? Could it be a domestic? There's a whole host of things, but now it looks like it's trending to somebody that had troubling and disturbing messages posted online. People argue and say, why didn't the police, why didn't the FBI get involved? And I think you mentioned it at the top, Anne-Marie. We've got these pesky things called the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment, and people are allowed to say things that are awful and bigoted and hateful. And where you make that determination in law enforcement that, okay, this individual is going to be predisposed to violence, it's a really tough call to make.
Yeah, and I should point out that Illinois does, in fact, have red flag laws. It's been on the books for a couple of years, barely used compared to some other states like Florida. But, just because you say something online doesn't mean you get flagged, right? Or something like that. In regards to this parade, it's a soft target. And I was talking earlier today, and when this happened, I thought, you think that this would be a safe environment because it's a small town. Maybe it's better to be in a big city where they have a massive police force, and then we're covering, a shooting in Philadelphia at another sort of similar celebratory event. So, the question is really sort of, how do you protect these soft targets?
Yeah, and that is the conundrum, because we cherish living in an open and free society. We don't want, you know, everything to be hardened, everything to have a police officer establishing martial law on a corner. We don't want to live like that. But I will share this with the two of you. My day job, I serve as the mayor of an upstate New York village of about 3,000 people. And total, including townfolk, we have about 13,000 folks. And as we were preparing for our 4th of July celebration, which is very large in Orange County, New York, these were some of the things that concern me. And people can always argue, it will never happen here. We don't have crime like that. It can never happen here. Tell that to the people in Highland Park. Tell that to the people in Newtown, Connecticut. These things can happen anywhere. And yes, evil always looks for the path of least resistance. It's like water. So even if you do everything perfectly, you can't prevent it, but you could possibly deter somebody by that show of force or by those deterrent precautions that you put in place.
But there's something else, James, which you mentioned, which is the online radicalization of these individuals. I know that we have, the United States, significant resources dedicated through our intelligence agencies to rooting out radicalization overseas. I wonder what the resources are that are dedicated here in the United States, because I sort of feel that we, as Americans, sometimes live with our heads in the sand. We point to other countries and say, that's something that happens there. Why did that young man leave a loving family to join ISIS or to join Al-Qaeda?
Right.
And we don't turn the microscope or the lens onto each other and say, why is that young person being radicalized online?
Right.
And what are we devoting? Forget the parents or the uncles who have no idea what their kids are doing online. What kind of police resources are dedicated to trying to root that out?
And James can speak to this, that increasingly what we have been seeing is the tactics that, you know, organizations like Al-Qaeda put in place.
The same ones here.
The same ones here. I mean, we're seeing these sort of radical groups deliberately going to events to start sort of fights so they can videotape it and put it online and inspire other people to join. James.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, let me try to do this quickly here. Great question, Vlad, and you knitted it together nicely, Anne-Marie. Here's the difference. Right of boom, meaning once something happens, right? The laws are the same. If you're a domestic terrorist or an international terrorist, it doesn't make a difference. Or if you commit a hate crime, the laws are the same. Left of boom, they are different. And why are they different? Because of the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment protects American citizens from illegal searches and seizures, meaning the government, without a warrant, cannot listen in on telephone calls or check to see who you're calling or watch other, unless it's online open source, they can't go into private chat rooms without a warrant. On the international scene, it's different, and we're allowed to do that. If someone is affiliated with an international terrorist organization, we don't have to go through the Fourth Amendment. That's the difference. Right of boom, the same. Left of boom, the Fourth Amendment.
So, James, to Vlad's question about, you know, enough resources dedicated to this, is it a question of resources, or is it just, you know, kind of like we've got to give a little to get a little? It's part of the balance of living in America. I hope there's more to it.
So put it in this perspective. On this planet, there are 7 billion people. This country, there are 327 million people. There are 700,000 law enforcement officers in this country. There are 12,000 FBI agents. It is impossible in something as vast as the internet. Globalization is a wonderful thing in a certain sense. In the other sense, it has these dark recesses, these places that you cannot police everything. And Anne-Marie, you pointed it out too. Reckless speech that we would look at and say that's dangerous can be determined to be wild hyperbole, satire, things like that. We have to be careful and balance those things.
All right. James Gagliano, always great to have you, my friend,
is.
to break this down and provide your analysis. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.